Are you good? Let's do it. Back clap. Dan Slicky Podcast, episode 38. William, new year. How we doing? How we feeling?
Doing well. It's good, Dan.
Good here. So it's a new year. Will. That's on my brain. That's on my brain. So I've been thinking about this idea around opportunity cost. Let me read the definition of opportunity cost, you will. It's the idea around the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. So it relates to almost everything. It relates to how we make decisions, how we spend our time, how we connect with others. And I think opportunity cost with Dan Slick is an outstanding name for this program right here. Will, help me out. Where am I wrong on opportunity cost with Dan Slick? Hottest podcast in the game.
Okay, so I need a better reason than just in Dan's head it makes sense.
What do you mean? That's a perfect reason. That's awesome. That's the reason. That's the only thing. It works in my head. Therefore, it should be the name.
So it's kind of like a self-deprecating name.
Is it?
A little bit of humor. Yeah, it's like saying you're giving up doing something to come listen to us, right?
Yeah, I think but you are. I mean, you're doing that with everything. The fact that we're doing this right now means we're not learning how to play the piano, right? That's an interesting. Every time you're doing something, you're not doing another thing. It's funny. It's an interesting concept. I kind of like it. And I feel like that's a lot of what we dive into here, whether it's talking about philosophy or work or even some policy stuff, even though we're not super topical. I think that it fits what we're going for and what our voice hopefully has been and what it will continue to be moving forward.
Right. So let's imagine it's a top 10 podcast now. Would it still be a good name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would people be like, oh yeah, like what an interesting idea. The name fits. You go on and you talk for short periods of time. I'm mostly on board. I just want to hear you articulate it.
I put you on your heels here, man. It's the only way to start 2021 is to put Will right on his heels. Yeah, I don't see why not. I think we can get guests with it. I think that you keep it fun, keep it light, keep the timer, keep the clock going. Explore. It can be about almost anything. It can be about like what we want it to be, but it just needs to be focused around that kind of concept of decision making and trade offs, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's where we focus and where our minds are most interested. So I'm gonna keep pitching it to you. Let's see what we got.
I'll see you in the after show. Okay, software update. So we all know that we're kind of afraid of small bugs when they don't really kill us anymore. We kind of solve that problem mostly. Don't go to Hawaii, I guess. Got some crazy bugs that can kill you. But what would happen if we had a little software update where we were actually scared to death of the things that could actually kill us? So what I'm talking about here are hamburgers, cigarettes, and speeding cars, Dan, vehicles.
I don't know about this one. If I was just like walking on any sort of road and saw a fast, a car going above 20 miles an hour and I started freaking out, I don't know.
It's getting into a car that's scary.
So any sort of like
walking's generally pretty safe.
The whole time you're just like in your car, like bugging the F out that you're going to hit something going, getting greater than 50 miles an hour.
But I mean, if you think about it, you can kind of do the software update if you really want to ruin any sort of party you're at. So for example, if you just ask, if you're trying to argue, if you're at a party trying to argue this point down, just say, oh, well, how many do you know someone who's been in a serious car accident? And most people will say, I know someone, and that will immediately get them, he's right. So if you want to win an argument and ruin a party, that's how you can do it.
Who started that in you, man? I don't know. It seems kind of like an anecdotal argument. I mean, it goes back to the
It's not an anecdotal argument.
That's pretty. If you say, have you lost someone? This, like, therefore
get
rid of this.
It will work because it is representative of. I'm saying if you get a random sample of a group of people at a party and you ask them that, they're gonna be a bunch who say like, oh yeah, I do, because it happens. That's why. And you ask the same thing about like heart disease or anything like that, obesity.
But these are the economic trade-offs that we make, right? Going back to the idea of opportunity costs and trade-offs.
What
are we going to do? Of like, do stop on people driving cars anymore? Like,
I don't know. It'd be pretty cool to just like not be afraid of heights.
Heights aren't going to kill you. I mean, but heights very well could. I mean,
way more people die in car accidents and heart disease than from falling from high places.
Than from free solo climbing Yosemite.
Yeah. One thing is those are freak accidents, so they don't happen as frequently. Anyway,
concept of the day. New segment for 2021. A lot of new shit going on here. I'm playing with this idea. I learned about it recently. I kind of heard it more reconnect, but this idea of the mere exposure effect. I'm thinking about it more in terms of like the dating scene. It's very odd to meet someone completely cold and like connect with them, but if you see them consistently over a given period of time, or you hear a new concept consistently over a given period of time, you like it more. So this mere exposure effect is really messing with my brain. I kind of like it. I kind of don't like it. What do you think about the mere exposure effect?
Yeah, there's a similar concept. I believe it's in biology of the adjacent possibilities of cells. So like cells cannot get nutrients if they don't have the nutrients directly adjacent and they pass to the membrane. So it's kind of a similar idea where it's like it can't happen period if you're not in the same space as something else. So I do like that idea. Now, the interesting part is like the feedback on the system. So it's like the more it's like people who just like. They have this real affection for where they're from, even if what they're from is like really objectively not that great.
Right. It's an interesting one. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of, I guess I'm a little bit on the fence on, not to steal your next segment here, Will, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think you still be aware of because I could see it going wrong in some ways.
100%. Yeah. I think it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because you just have no real opportunity for change. Or the idea of just like going off on your own, like in a band of however many 100 people at most, is just not really an option. So like you better get used to what is there. Like you kind of like that shit.
Yeah. And it's kind of like we can get used to anything, which is kind of double-edged sword as well, right?
Yeah. It's a weird concept, man. Yeah. And it's like. I guess it makes for a better life now, but it's similar to what I said earlier, I think another episode about the mindfulness practice. It's like, is it better to deal with your situation or just like create a new one? But you might not, because you kind of like your first one, or you can like your first one, but you just create a new one for yourself. So that's kind of like the paradox that happens in the brain that I'm trying to square that circle, I suppose. There's an opportunity cost everything, it's just it's tough.
Oh man, just keeps going, doesn't he? All right, so Dan, you're not gonna like this one. So I'm a bit on the fence with determinism here. Two reasons why. First one, what if it's physically impossible to determine something? So for example, there are X amount of atoms on Earth that interact X amount of times. It's physically impossible to compute that, so it's actually impossible to determine something because there aren't enough atoms in the universe.
Sorry. So I'll let you go over your time. Don't worry about it. Keep going. What's your second?
We can just start there. That's fine.
We can start there with the atoms. I don't think I have a ton to say about atoms at a molecular level in regards to my thoughts on determinism. I mean, I guess you could say that we are made of atoms, therefore like one single atom that. And I was like, at what point am I choosing which atoms of my body are doing whatever they're doing?
The point. So determinism is like we could know, right? If we knew down to the molecular smallest scale, if we knew what the laws that governed it were, we could determine what was going to happen.
Right.
But if it's impossible to do that, actually, like physically impossible, like the physics like do not allow it to happen, does that actually mean determinism is actually an impossibility, and does that invalidate it? Does that make sense?
I think that we're coming at it from different places. I think that there's like pretty significant. I just think about it from the human level because if you ask most folks the idea around this idea of autonomy, right? I'm the controller of my words, actions, what have you. They're the ones that feel it. But then when it comes to like ideas around that are a little more abstract, even think about animals. It's like does a lion have free will, or is he living in a deterministic universe? Folks might say more like probably not. Or is weather deterministic? Does that have a conscience that can control itself? Probably not. So I guess my point on that would be something like there's pretty significant evidence from I think it's like Danny Kahneman and what's that book, the Thinking Fast and Slow, around decision making and how there's time between when you actually make a decision and your conscious awareness of that decision. There you go. We're at time, but like that to me is proof in and of itself that you just based on the number of atoms in your brain. I kind of lost my train of thought there. I don't know if I had my determinism, but I think that the fact that you can make your decisions before you make your decisions is evidence enough to counteract your point.
Okay, so I'm not saying that there is free will. I'm just saying that determinism's out the window. I'm not saying just because determinism's not there, that doesn't mean it just, we need to, determinism is a misnomer, basically. It's like a poor name for it because we can never know. And you brought up the weather. I mean, chaos theory is a case in point. Like, we can never predict the weather further than a couple weeks ahead accurately,
right.
because it's a chaotic system, and a lot of crazy things happen in chaotic systems where small differences lead to larger changes that can't be predicted. But that's my whole point. It's just like
everything.
Doesn't make the argument weaker though if it's like, hey, we call it determinism, but we can't actually ever predict it. So it's like
I don't think so, man.
No? Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So it's only a retrospective sort of, it couldn't have been any other way sort of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's the strongest argument. I think that just because we don't exactly know what the future will hold, I don't think it's an argument against determinism. Imagine, because it's like it's an interesting concept because like, if, for example, we did know exactly what would happen, if I knew exactly every minute of my life for the next 60 years, then I could, in theory, just do otherwise. But the fact that I don't know otherwise, or don't know what's going to happen, is what creates that ability for me to, I guess, I'm not saying that change or choice aren't possible, but I guess I'm not exactly understanding your thesis here.
I'm not saying that. So we have the experience of making a choice. That's like something we feel that we think or imagine that we do, right? I mean, like many people have that experience. However, when you examine it more closely, it doesn't really hold up. I'm on board with that. What I'm kind of on the fence about is like extending that to like, we will like be able to predict, like an animal's reactions, what people will do in situations, whereas just like that's something that's actually unknowable, which does make it a little, it seems like it leaves the door a little bit open to some spooky stuff.
Ooh, some spookiness.